Imagine waking up one morning to find a bright yellow violation notice taped to your front door. Not for playing loud music at midnight, not for letting your grass grow 3 feet tall, not for parking a broken-down car on the lawn, but for a single flower pot. A perfectly innocent, beautifully blooming flower pot sitting quietly on your own front porch, minding its own business, bringing a tiny bit of color to an otherwise ordinary morning. Now imagine that notice says you owe $200 every single day. Until that flower pot disappears, $200 a day. Think about that for a moment. That is more than some people make in a full day of work. That is a car payment, a utility bill, a week of groceries for a family. And the clock, according to that little yellow notice, had already started ticking. Here's the thing about living in a homeowners association community. You sign up for it, knowing that there are rules about fence heights and paint colors and where you can park your car. Rules that, most of the time, make a certain kind of sense. You accept those rules because you want to live in a well-maintained community. You trust that the people enforcing those rules are doing so fairly and in good faith. What you do not expect, what no reasonable person would ever expect, is that someone with a clipboard and a brand new title would decide to use those rules as a personal weapon. You do not expect to wake up one morning and realize that the pleasant-seeming woman who ran for HOA president on a platform of community pride had spent her first 3 months in office quietly rewriting the rule book in her own favor. That is exactly what happened to us. And when we found out, we did not quietly move the flower pot inside and apologize. We did not write a check. We did not smile at the next neighborhood barbecue and pretend nothing had happened. We fought back every single step of the way. And what unfolded over the next several months was the most jaw-dropping, infuriating, expensive, exhausting, and ultimately deeply satisfying legal battle our quiet little suburban neighborhood had ever seen. This is our story, and it starts with a geranium. It was a Tuesday morning in April when everything changed, though we did not know it yet. My wife, Sarah, had been planning her porch garden for weeks. She had always loved flowers. Growing up, her grandmother had a front porch covered in pots and hanging baskets, and every summer they would spend afternoons watering and trimming and just sitting there enjoying the color. When we bought our house in Maplewood Estates 6 years ago, one of the first things Sarah said was that she wanted a porch she could be proud of. She had spent 2 weekends at garden centers, comparing terracotta pots, reading about which plants did best in morning sun versus afternoon shade. She finally settled on a beautiful red geranium in a wide, rust-colored pot that she placed just to the left of our front door. It looked perfect, warm and welcoming. The kind of thing you see on a house and think, nice people live there. We had lived in Maplewood Estates for 6 years without a single complaint filed against us. Not one. We paid our HOA dues on time every quarter. We kept our lawn mowed and our gutters clean. We painted our shutters the approved shade of colonial blue when we noticed they were starting to peel, even though, honestly, they could have gone another season. We attended the annual HOA meetings, sat through the budget presentations, voted on the committee elections. We even volunteered twice for the neighborhood beautification days where everyone comes out to plant flowers along the entrance road and pick up trash in the common areas. We were the kind of neighbors every HOA dreams about. And we were completely blindsided by what came next. The notice appeared on a Wednesday. Sarah found it taped to our front door at about 7:15 in the morning when she went out to water the geranium. She thought at first it was some kind of advertisement. Then she read it. Then she called me at work. It was an official HOA violation notice, printed on the association's letterhead, citing bylaw section 4.2. 7. The language was formal and stiff. No decorative items, furniture, or plant material shall be placed on the front porch in a manner visible from the street without prior written approval, from the HOA Board of Directors. The notice stated that we were in violation of this bylaw and had 48 hours to remove the offending item or face a fine of $200 per day until compliance was achieved. I actually laughed when Sarah read it to me over the phone. I thought there had been some kind of mistake. We had never seen this bylaw before. We had read through the HOA rules when we first moved in, and there was nothing about porch plants. I told Sarah I would look into it when I got home, that it was probably just a misunderstanding. We thought it was a mistake. It was not. Karen Whitmore had been elected HOA president at the January meeting, just 3 months before the geranium appeared on our porch. She had run a surprisingly organized campaign for a neighborhood election, printed flyers in everyone's mailbox, a little table at the community mailbox station with a sign-up sheet and a bowl of candy, door-to-door visits where she introduced herself and talked about wanting to restore pride in the community and make Maplewood Estates a place residents could be truly proud of. We had voted for her. She seemed energetic and organized and genuinely interested in improving the neighborhood. Looking back now, I recognize the signs we missed, the way she took notes on everything during the candidate forum, the questions she asked about enforcement procedures and fine structures, the particular emphasis she placed on the word standards. But we were not looking for those things then. We were just hoping someone would finally fix the pothole at the entrance to Birchwood Lane. That evening, I called Karen directly using the contact number on the violation notice. She answered on the second ring, which surprised me. I introduced myself and explained that we had received the notice and were a bit confused, since we had never seen a bylaw about porch decorations before. She was polite, but absolutely firm. She explained that the bylaw had been updated at the February board meeting, a meeting I had attended. She noted helpfully, and that the amendment had been included in the meeting minutes, which were available on the HOA website. She acknowledged that the change had been significant enough to warrant individual notification letters, which she said had been sent out in March. We never received one, I told her. She expressed regret about that, but said it did not affect our obligation to comply. I asked for an extension, just a few extra days to sort things out, understand the rule, maybe attend a board meeting and discuss it properly. She said the violation process was already underway and granting extensions would be unfair to other residents who were in full compliance. He wished me a pleasant evening and ended the call. Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. Neither of us knew quite what to say. It felt deeply wrong, but we could not immediately articulate why. It was just a flower pot after all. Maybe we should just move it inside and be done with the whole thing. Maybe it was not worth the stress, but something kept nagging at me. The bylaw she had cited did not sound familiar at all, and I was someone who had actually read the HOA documents. I pulled up the HOA website that night and found the bylaws document. I scrolled to section 4.2.7. It said nothing about porch decorations. It was about approved materials for fence construction. Day 1 of the fine arrived before we had even fully processed what was happening. $200 gone for a flower pot that had been on our porch for less than 2 weeks. We moved the geranium inside that first morning, reluctantly, while we tried to figure out what was going on. Sarah put it on the kitchen windowsill where it got enough light to survive. She did not say much about it, but I could tell it bothered her more than she let on. That plant represented something to her beyond just a plant. It was her little piece of home. I spent my lunch break that day digging through the HOA's online document archive. What I found was confusing. There were 2 different versions of the bylaws available for download. One was dated from 2019, the year before we moved in, and it was the version I had always read. The other was a newer document, uploaded in February of this year, and it contained the amendment Karen had cited. Section 4.2.7 in the new version did indeed include the language about porch decorations requiring board approval, but something was off. I pulled up the February board meeting minutes. The amendment was listed under new business, and it showed a vote of 4-0 in favor. There were 7 board members. The minutes noted that 3 board members were absent. I am not a lawyer. I have never pretended to be one. But I had read our HOAS governing documents carefully enough to know that amendments to the bylaws were not supposed to work this way. The community charter, which was a separate document, stated clearly that changes to the community bylaws required approval by 2/3 of the board, plus notice to all homeowners and an opportunity for a general homeowner vote within 60 days. None of that had happened. The amendment had been passed by 4 of 7 board members in a single meeting with no homeowner notification and no general vote. I fired off an email to the full HOA board that evening, politely outlining my concerns and requesting an emergency meeting to discuss the matter before additional fines accumulated. I kept it professional and calm. I laid out the specific charter provisions I believed had been violated and asked for clarification. Karen replied the following morning. Her response was 2 sentences long. The board has reviewed your concerns and finds the amendment to be properly enacted under our governing documents. Further disputes should be directed to the HOAS legal counsel. She included an attorney's contact information and a reminder that the fine was continuing to accrue. Day 2, another $200. Day 3, another $200. We were watching money drain away in real time, and the entity taking it was our own neighborhood association. We were not just fighting for a flower pot anymore. We were fighting for every homeowner in Maplewood Estates. My brother-in-law suggested we just pay the fines and move on. A few friends said the same thing. The math, they argued, would eventually make compliance the sensible choice. But something had shifted for me by that point. It was no longer about the flower pot or even about the money. It was about the principle of the thing. If Karen could push through an invalid rule change and then fine us $200 a day for violating it, she could do anything. And apparently, she already had been doing anything, which we would discover very soon. I started keeping detailed records, every notice, every email, every phone call, logged with the date, time, and a summary of what was said. I did not know exactly how those records would be used, but I knew instinctively that documentation was going to matter. Sarah, meanwhile, had started talking to the neighbors. On the morning of day 8, we made a decision that surprised even us. We picked up the geranium, carried it back outside, and set it exactly where it had been. Left side of the porch, right next to the door, where the morning light hit it perfectly. We did not do this impulsively. We had spent the previous several evenings in conversation with our neighbor 3 doors down, a quiet man named Gerald Park, who had retired after a long career as a real estate attorney. We had gone to him not because we knew his background. We had simply noticed his lights on late and knocked on his door, feeling desperate for someone to talk to. It turned out to be one of the luckiest knocks we had ever made. Gerald listened to everything. He looked at the bylaw documents, the charter, the meeting minutes, the notices. He took his time. He made notes on a yellow legal pad in the careful handwriting of someone who had spent decades taking careful notes. When he was done, he set his pen down and looked at us over his reading glasses. "The amendment is not valid," he said. "It is that simple. Your charter requires a 2/3 board vote with quorum, homeowner notification, and an opportunity for general homeowner input. None of those requirements were satisfied. A 4-0 vote with 3 absent board members does not constitute a valid quorum for a bylaw amendment under the terms of your charter. This document has no legal force." He paused and then added something that has stayed with me. He said, "If the rule is not valid, then you are not in violation of any rule." And if you are not in violation of any rule, then the fines they are assessing against you are not legitimate fines. They are collecting money from you based on an invalid authority. That is a serious problem for them, not for you. Quorum for a bylaw amendment under the terms of your charter. This document has no legal force. He paused and then added something that has stayed with me. He said, "If the rule is not valid, then you are not in violation of any rule. And if you are not in violation of any rule, then the fines they are assessing against you are not legitimate fines. They are collecting money from you based on an invalid authority. That is a serious problem for them, not for you. The amendment be rescinded." It gave the board 14 days to respond before we pursued further action. Then we put the flower pot back on the porch. She thought we would blink. We did not blink. We expected anger. We expected another notice. What we did not expect was just how fast it came. By 9 that same morning, a new violation notice was attached to our door. Karen had apparently been watching, or had someone watching for her. Day 9, $200. Day 10, $200. The fines were now over $2,000, and we still had not heard anything substantive from the board in response to our letter. Just notices. Just the quiet, mechanized accumulation of a debt we did not believe we owed. But the flower pot stayed. Every morning Sarah watered it. Every morning I photographed the porch to document its presence, the violation notices, and the date. Every day I updated my log. We were not blinking. Sarah has always been the more social one between us. While I was buried in documents and legal research, she was walking the neighborhood, catching up with people she had waved to for years but never really talked to. What she heard over the following 2 weeks changed the entire shape of what we were doing. The Delgado family on Birchwood Lane had received 3 violation notices since February. Their crime? A portable basketball hoop in the driveway that their 11-year-old son used on weekends. They had moved it to the backyard after the first notice, but the second notice cited it as visible from the alley. After the third notice, they had simply deflated it and put it in the garage. Their son had not played basketball in 2 months. The Hendersons, a retired couple on Oak Drive, had received a notice about decorative garden stakes they used to mark their flower beds along the front walkway. Phyllis Henderson, who was 74 years old and tended that garden every single day, told Sarah she had cried when she got the notice. She had removed the stakes immediately and had not been back outside to tend the garden since. Her husband said she just did not feel welcome in her own front yard anymore. A young couple, the New Yens, who had moved in just 8 months ago, had received a letter threatening formal action over their doorbell camera. The letter claimed the camera's angle captured a portion of the sidewalk, which Karen had determined constituted a privacy violation against pedestrians. The Nugents had not even known that was a rule. They had installed the camera after a package theft and were genuinely frightened by the notice. There was more. A man who drove a work truck had been told to keep it out of the driveway during daylight hours. A woman who had planted a small vegetable garden in her side yard received a notice about unapproved plant material in a visible area. Another family had been told their welcome mat was the wrong dimensions. In every case, the notice had come from Karen. In every case, the homeowner had simply complied without pushing back because they did not know they had the right to push back, and because fighting seemed more exhausting than giving in. Karen had been using power she had invented, and no one had told her no. Sarah came home one evening with a handwritten list of 7 households who had agreed to meet informally. Within a week, that number had grown to 14. We held the meeting at the Park Pavilion on a Saturday afternoon, with Gerald present to explain the legal situation in plain terms. The mood at that meeting was a complicated mixture of relief and anger. Relief because everyone there had been carrying the weight of their situation alone, convinced that the HOA was in the right and they had simply made some mistake. Anger because they were now understanding, collectively, that they had been manipulated. Gerald explained the charter requirements again. He explained that homeowners in an HOA community have rights that are legally protected. He explained that an HOA cannot assess fines under rules that were not properly enacted. He explained that there are mechanisms, both internal and governmental, for challenging HOA overreach. Several people cried. The Hendersons held hands. The new gens took careful notes. We decided that day to act collectively. We would pool resources, document our individual experiences, and find legal representation. Gerald, despite being retired, agreed to help us organize our records and identify the right kind of attorney to hire. It took us about 10 days to find the firm. We interviewed two. The one we hired, a small firm with a specific focus on community association law, reviewed our documents over a long weekend and came back to us on a Monday morning with a clear and direct assessment. Karen had not just overstepped. She had created a pattern of enforcement that, taken together, looked a great deal like targeted harassment. And the mechanism she had used, an improperly enacted bylaw amendment, was the foundation of every single action she had taken since February. Pull out that foundation, and everything built on it came down. We had a strong case, possibly a very strong case. And there were 14 families ready to stand behind it. 63 days after Sarah placed the geranium on our porch, our attorney dollars in fines against us alone, fines we had continued to document but declined to pay, and a neighborhood that had been quietly suffering under rules that filed suit in county civil court. 63 days. 4,200 did not legally exist. The filing named the Maplewood Estates HOA as the primary defendant. It named the board members individually, including Karen Whitmore, on the grounds that they had acted outside the scope of their authority and had continued to do. So after receiving formal written notice that the bylaw in question was invalid, it named Karen individually as well on additional counts related to the pattern of selective enforcement and harassment documented. Across multiple households, the claims were specific and detailed. Enforcement of an improperly enacted bylaw amendment. Assessment of fines without valid legal authority. Abuse of HOA authority. A pattern of targeted enforcement constituting harassment. Improper denial of homeowner procedural rights under the community charter. The total fines assessed across all 14 participating households came to just over $41,000. On the same day we filed, Gerald helped us submit a formal written complaint to the county's Homeowners Association Oversight Office. Most people do not know this office exists. It is a small division within the county government that monitors HOA conduct and has the authority to investigate complaints, compel records disclosure, and in serious cases recommend regulatory action. We submitted copies of the bylaw documents, the charter, the meeting minutes, and a summary of the enforcement actions taken against each of the 14 households. The complaint was accepted for review within 4 business days. The HOA's attorney did not have it dismissed. He quietly advised the board to settle. Karen, from what neighbors who remained friendly with her told us, was initially dismissive about the lawsuit. She had apparently told her closest allies on the board that this was exactly the kind of frivolous litigation that troublemakers filed when they did not get their way, and that the HOA's attorney would have it thrown out before the end of the month. She seemed genuinely confident. Or she was performing confidence, which is a different thing. What she did not know was the shape of what was actually coming. Our attorney had a relationship with a contact in the county oversight office and had reached out informally before the complaint was even filed, alerting them to the nature of the situation and the volume of affected homeowners. The oversight office was already taking the matter seriously before they received our formal paperwork. The HOAS attorney went quiet for another 10 days. Then he called again. This time, he was more specific about what the board was willing to consider. We could tell, from the shift in tone and the particulars of what he was offering, that someone had given the board a clear-eyed assessment of their exposure. That assessment had not been encouraging for them. The County Oversight Office, we later learned, had formally opened an inquiry and sent the HOA a records request. The board was now facing a civil lawsuit and a governmental investigation simultaneously. The flower pot, it turned out, had grown into something considerably larger than a flower pot. The mediation session was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early October, about 5 months after the whole thing began. We drove to the mediator's office in downtown with our attorney and Gerald, who came as a supporting witness. It was a cool, clear morning, and I remember thinking it felt like the kind of day when things get resolved. Karen arrived with the HOA's outside counsel, a man named Barrett, whom we had only spoken to through our own attorney until that point. 2 board members came as well, both of whom looked genuinely uncomfortable in a way that Karen did not. Karen looked prepared. She had a leather portfolio and what appeared to be a substantial folder of printed documents. She greeted the mediator warmly and did not look at us when we came in. Mediation is not a trial. There is no judge, no jury, no dramatic courtroom moment where someone pounds a gavel. It is a structured conversation, facilitated by a neutral third party, with the goal of reaching a voluntary agreement that both sides can live with. It is, in many ways, more civilized than litigation and also more exhausting, because you are sitting in a room with the people who have made your life difficult for months, and you have to maintain a certain decorum throughout. We went through the morning in separate rooms, with the mediator shuttling. Between them, our attorney laid out our position methodically and completely. She had organized everything into a clear sequence: the timeline, the documents, the charter requirements, the vote totals, the absence of homeowner notification, the pattern of enforcement across 15 households, the county oversight inquiry. It was thorough, and it was calm, and it was frankly overwhelming in its completeness. Around 11 in the morning, the mediator went into the other room and stayed there for almost 40 minutes. When she returned, she asked our attorney a few clarifying questions about the county oversight process and the current status of the inquiry. Our attorney answered precisely. There was another long break. We ate sandwiches from a box the mediator's office had provided and did not talk much. Gerald read a paperback he had brought in his coat pocket. Our attorney reviewed her notes. It wasn't everything we wanted, but it was justice. When we reconvened in the early afternoon, Barrett spoke for the HOA. He was careful and measured and clearly experienced at this kind of conversation. He acknowledged that there were questions about the procedural validity of the bylaw amendment and that the board had decided, in the interest of the community, to take a cooperative approach to resolving those questions. Karen sat very still throughout Barrett's presentation. She did not add anything. She did not disagree with anything. She stared at a point somewhere above the mediator's shoulder and kept her expression carefully neutral. Whatever had been said in that other room during those 40 minutes, it had reached her. The mediation session ended without a final signed agreement that day, but with the clear understanding that the parties would reach one. The specific terms would take another 3 weeks to finalize, but the shape of the outcome was visible by the time we walked out into the October afternoon. We drove home mostly in silence. It was not the dramatic courtroom vindication that part of me had imagined in darker moments of the past 5 months. It was quieter than that, but it was real. The settlement agreement was signed on a Tuesday morning in late October, 23 days after the mediation session. We were not present for the signing. Our attorney called us afterward and walked us through the terms, which she described as substantially in our favor. Every fine assessed against every household under the invalid amendment was voided, completely, not reduced, not deferred, voided. The HOA's records were to be updated to reflect no outstanding violations for any of the participating households related to the disputed bylaw. The amendment itself was formally rescinded and removed from the HOA's governing documents. The HOA agreed to reimburse legal fees for 3 of the households that had suffered the most significant financial harm from the enforcement actions. They agreed to conduct a full audit of all fines assessed since January, to be reviewed by an independent third party, and any that could not be justified under the properly enacted pre-amendment bylaws would be refunded. The County Oversight Office closed its inquiry after reviewing the settlement terms and receiving confirmation of compliance. They noted in their closing letter that the HOA had taken appropriate corrective action and that they would monitor the association's compliance for the following 12 months. Karen Whitmore resigned from the HOA board 4 days after the settlement was finalized. The notice posted on the HOA website cited personal reasons and expressed gratitude for the opportunity to serve the community. Several people I know received the notification and texted me immediately. My response was the same each time. I hope she found what she was looking for. That is not entirely sincere, if I am being honest. But it is what I have settled on. Some fights find you. This one found us over a flower pot. We are glad we did not walk away from it. The new board was elected at a special meeting in December. 6 new members, including 3 people from our coalition who had never previously been involved in HOA governance. The election had the highest homeowner participation rate in Maplewood Estates history. 41% of eligible homeowners voted, compared to the usual 8 or 9. The new board's first action was to adopt a transparency and due process policy that fundamentally changed how the HOA operates. Every proposed bylaw amendment must now be posted on the community website and mailed to all homeowners at least 30 days before any board vote. After a board vote, there is a 60-day window during which homeowners can petition for a general vote. No fine over $50 can be assessed without a warning notice, and a 15-day cure period. All enforcement actions must be documented and reported quarterly to the full homeowner community. These are not radical ideas. They are basic principles of fair governance. They should have been in place from the beginning. They are in place now. Our homeowners coalition did not dissolve after the settlement. We formalized it as an independent community organization, separate from the HOA board, which monitors HOA communications and provides resources for homeowners who have questions or concerns about enforcement actions. We have a website now and a mailing list with 62 subscribers. We hold quarterly meetings. Gerald serves as an informal advisor and attends when his health allows. The Hendersons replanted their front garden in the spring. Phyllis sent Sarah a photograph of it in bloom. The Delgado boy got his basketball hoop back, and on weekend afternoons you can hear him and his friends in the driveway from 2 blocks away. The Nugent's doorbell camera is still there, pointing exactly where it always was. As for us, Sarah's geranium did not survive the winter. That particular plant had been through too much, moved in and out, stressed by the cold windowsill and then the heat of the legal battle, if flowers can be said to feel such things. But in April, Sarah went back to the garden center. She bought a new geranium, same variety, same deep red. She found a slightly larger terracotta pot this time. She put it on the porch, left side, right next to the door, exactly where the morning light hits it best. It is still there, and it is going to stay there. If you are reading this because you are dealing with something similar, a rule that does not seem right, an authority that does not seem to be acting in good faith, a situation that everyone around you is telling you to just accept and move on from, I want to tell you something. You have rights, they are real, and they are worth defending. The process of defending them is hard and expensive and exhausting, and there are many moments when giving in feels like the only sane option. We know, we lived that, but some things matter beyond what is convenient. Your home is one of them. Your right to exist in it peacefully without being harassed by someone with a clipboard and a manufactured grievance is one of them. Fight for it if you can. Find your Gerald. Document everything. And do not move the flower pot.